When a battle of colorful welcome mats versus metal spikes erupts with my HOA's self-appointed queen, can laughter bridge the absurdity of rules and reclaim our community spirit? As the sunlight danced lazily over my driveway, illuminating my delightfully vibrant welcome mat, a kaleidoscope of colors that screamed, "Step right up to my smug, sunny abode," I felt a deep sense of tranquility. That is, until a familiar, high-pitched shriek shattered the morning peace like a rock band at a library. It was none other than Linda Cartwright, the self-appointed HOA overlord, whose morning routine undoubtedly included ransacking my driveway for any perceived offenses. I ventured a glance out the window as she flailed her arms, her perfectly coiffed black hair bouncing like an angry little bird. My welcome mat, once a proud sentinel of cheerfulness, had apparently crossed some invisible line into the realm of madness, where only beige and uninspired white existed. "Do you think color is an accessory or a crime, Linda?" I mumbled into my coffee mug, observing her frenzied gestures like she was conducting an orchestra of absurdity. I had been expecting a critique about my lack of mulch, or the plant I'd affectionately dubbed Bernie, a rogue potted cactus that dared to grow beyond HOA guidelines. However, this colorful feathered affront was new territory. With a chuckle, I waved dismissively, as if to say, "Please come back when you have something a bit juicier to complain about." My casually defiant gesture only seemed to fuel the flames of her entitlement. She stomped off to her castle of rules and regulations, her scowl so deep it could have been a fissure in the earth's crust. The following morning, my cheerful sanctuary of color was juxtaposed against the dull drone of HOA meetings, brightened only by Sam Myers, my ever-supportive neighbor and professional antagonist of Linda's reign. "I heard she's planning something big," he said conspiratorially, leaning against my mailbox with energy bottled from at least 3 cups of coffee. Her spies could be anywhere. My last commission was an abstract piece, entitled Unruly Mat Madness, for the upcoming exhibit. He flashed his trademark easygoing grin, but the mischief twinkling in his eye made me suspect he wasn't just sharing idle chit-chat. Just as I expected my regular dose of HOA drama, the absurdity escalated. Days later, I uncovered the true depths of Linda's pettiness when I returned home to find a jarring sight on my driveway, a row of glimmering metal spikes, strategically placed like misguided lawn art in some dadaist performance piece. At first glance, it looked like the remnants of a medieval siege, only instead of a castle, I suspected Linda was trying to fortify her imaginary domain against my vibrant spirit. My driveway, turned into a battlefield of entitlement, stood as a testament to a tit-for-tat gone horribly, hilariously wrong. I half expected Monty Python to pop out from behind my bushes, declaring that this was all just a cheeky skit gone awry. My initial shock soon morphed into a chuckle, which evolved into a full-blown belly laugh as the realization dawned on me. Linda had officially declared war, and her weapon of choice? Spikes. I could already see my future. The neighborhood would either label her as a deranged villain or a misunderstood artist who needed more hobbies outside of crushing personal freedoms. But of course, it wasn't long before karma popped its lovely head in to join the fun. I fashioned a sign from an old piece of plywood, hastily painted with the words, "Danger, HOA, viewpoints, are sharp," a cheeky nod to Linda's creative expression of disdain. By the end of our titanic showdown, my phone buzzed incessantly with neighbors, the kind who usually favored quiet civility, now suddenly vocal and entertainingly supportive. Neighbors began taking detours to get an eyeful of "Welcome to Spiketown." Perhaps they were lining up to witness the slapstick absurdity unfolding right under Linda's iron-fisted rule. I practically cackled at their relentless social media memes, crafting laughing emojis and GIFs starring Linda, who had inadvertently become the resident antagonist of our community. "Wait until I show you the next act," I told Sam over coffee. "This is only the beginning." As the narrative unfolded, Linda's fortune took an unexpected twist. Apparently, spikes aren't on the suggested HOA installation list, as I later discovered when the police showed up at her door. The uproarious looks on our neighbors' faces, mingled with disbelief and delight, made it almost worth the anxiety-fueled mornings of watching my driveway turn into a stage for Linda's eccentricities. Linda, the self-proclaimed queen of complaints, was now in a bit of a pickle. "Well then," I murmured with a smirk, thinking of the delicious irony of the situation. Spikes, leading to arrest. Who would have thought that the warrior of white picket fences could be felled by her own overzealous attempts at enforcing rules? The following days were a whirlwind of bemusement and disbelief. News of Linda's impromptu spike display had morphed into the local legend of the year, exciting everyone from our yoga moms to the teenage skateboarders aiming for a thrill. As I sipped my third cup of coffee, my own personal ritual of fortification against the outer chaos, Sam swung by my porch, sporting a handmade t-shirt. "Spiky roads are gritty," emblazoned across it. "You're becoming the HOA Robin Hood," he declared dramatically, throwing one hand up as if he were about to shield us from Linda's reign of terror, while brandishing a plastic cup filled with lemonade. The absurdity of the situation, with merry neighborhood cheers echoing in the streets, provided an inadvertent soundtrack to our increasingly ridiculous existence. Little did we suspect that the saga was about to take an even more ludicrous turn. The next Saturday, I prepared for an uncharacteristically sunny day of community spirit, where the neighborhood had banded together to host a driveway potluck in my honor. Because what says community better than shared food and roaring laughter? Exclaimed Sam, as we set up chairs and a makeshift buffet table covered with misfit dishes, ranging from burnt casseroles to desserts that had still been warm when they were served, the true mark of neighbors bonding through culinary chaos. The Spike Saga had united the quiet dissenters, the "I just move here" renters, and even wooed Linda's staunchest enforcers to the side of hilarity and rebellion. When life gives you mishaps, throw a party. Is that not the unwritten motto of suburban living? As laughter streamed through the air and plates clinked together, Linda's absence was acutely felt. The neighborhood buzzed with her absence, and we couldn't help but create fictional scenarios that ranged from her being held captive by spikes in her own yard to flailing her arms in despair, trapped inside her fortress of regulations. "Oh, imagine," I chuckled, "Linda sulking in her home, staring at her ceiling, wondering how she could turn things around without a miniature spike farm." This sort of gallows humor often felt like a shot of espresso to our spirits. Who knew that what started as a satire against HOA tyranny would lead to a booming satirical renaissance? But just as I was beginning to wonder whether our quaint life had stepped into the realm of comedy scripts, the doorbell rang with utmost urgency. To everyone's universal shock, it was Linda, eyes blazing behind her glasses, which were perhaps a tad too stylish for her usual drab ensemble. She stood there, poised for battle but stunted by disbelief at the sight that welcomed her. A driveway full of cheerful neighbors, laughter spilling, and a buffet offering every possible temptation of community camaraderie, all while her spikes lay dismantled in a corner, forgotten like last season's fashion. "I demand to know what is going on here," she shouted, her commanding tone barely audible over the cacophony of a robust guacamole battle unfolding. "Oh, sweet Karma, how delightful you are." Sam, who had donned a fetching apron emblazoned with the griller of thrills, took it upon himself to step forward. "We're just sharing some good vibes, Linda. Spike-free, of course." His impish grin triggered a ripple of laughter through the crowd, and I barely refrained from rolling on the ground with glee. The standoff was becoming an impending showdown of comedic proportions. Linda's expression flipped between rage and utter bafflement, like a cat watching a dog attempt to climb a tree. That was the moment I felt slightly bad for her, her meticulously manicured plans crumbling under the weight of sheer absurdity. Perhaps, just perhaps, this would lead to a moment of reflection. What followed was not quite what anyone expected. The impromptu potluck transformed into a live performance, where each neighbor took turns sharing ludicrous anecdotes of their own HOA hindrances, as Linda stood there, the unwitting audience to their hilarious interpretations. "Remember that time she told me I had to repaint my mailbox because it was too rustic?" someone exclaimed, and the crowd erupted in laughter. Rustic, Linda? I have no idea how a mailbox can be too rustic. They continued, tossing more comical tales back and forth, until one enthusiastic neighbor, always a pro at theatrics, mimicked Linda's signature furrowed brow to perfection, igniting belly laughs throughout the driveway. It was a poignant moment where I couldn't help but think, these are the sort of memories that linger far longer than the concerns of petunias versus geraniums. Amid the chaos, amid the laughter and shenanigans, something shifted in Linda. Perhaps she'd guffawed just a second too long, or maybe she was genuinely grappling with exasperation. As singing joined the buffet hall, she finally cracked, the corners of her lips curling into a reluctant smile. I darted a glance toward her, utterly bewildered by the transformation. "Linda, are you smiling?" I teased, eyebrows shooting up so high they almost melded with my hairline. Perhaps it was the classic case of suburban combat turning into unexpected camaraderie, proving how laughter can oftentimes be the best resolution to petty grievances. As the sun dipped low and the golden hues blanketed the driveway, Linda strode over amidst the roars of laughter, carrying a plate of homemade brownies, a rather enigmatic gesture coming from our most stalwart enforcement officer. "Well, if I can't beat you, I might as well join you," she muttered under her breath before handing the plate to Sam, who proclaimed as though he were a sage prophet, "Then let's toast to victory, however unconventional it may come." With my smile blossoming amidst the chaos, I raised my glass, glancing at Linda, who stood awkwardly, still pinching the edges of her crisp blouse, but relishing for the first time what it felt like to actually be part of something that extended beyond rules and regulations, something truly human. From that day forward, "Welcome to Spiketown" morphed into a cherished phrase signifying resilience against conformity, while Linda, much to my amusement, became our most eccentric ally, leaning unknowingly into the vibrant chaos of life. Life will surely serve us more absurdities, but now we were ready for anything, even if it meant a battle of art and spikes. After that fateful potluck, where laughter proved mightier than the most well-documented HOA guidelines, the dynamic within our little neighborhood took a turn more unexpected than Linda's brownie offer. As we embarked on our newfound friendship, my creative juices flowed faster than ever. I soon began crafting a series of cheeky volunteer committees, which consisted of absolutely nothing more than snacks and lawn chairs. First on the agenda was Subdivision Shenanigans, a monthly gathering where we would concoct ludicrous neighborhood improvement projects, ranging from elaborate community gnome parades to a full-scale reworking of the neighborhood watch as a neighborhood watch for spikes. Our glamorous committee meetings turned into stand-up comedy nights, fueled by ice cream sundaes, each scoop accompanied by a round of uproarious anecdotes about Linda's formerly iron-fisted reign. Linda, surprisingly, became the unofficial event handler, showcasing her newfound enthusiasm for being included, albeit awkwardly. During our committee meetings, her eye-twitching disapproval of our shenanigans melted a little more with each shared laugh. She even began surfacing at grocery store sales with delightfully corny pun-laden flyers sporting gnomes, engaging in absurd sports, spreading our campaigns with all the excitement of a third-generation news anchor announcing a cat tournament. "Here's the flyer for our upcoming community spiky showdown," she exclaimed, team leader vibes radiating off her. Never did I think I'd describe Linda as team leader in any context. We were diving headfirst into a world where ordinary suburban life juggled greatness alongside gnome-stuffed antics. However, just when we thought we were cruising along the merry wave of neighborhood camaraderie, a rogue twist awaited us from the depths of course, Linda's own meticulous notes. One sunny afternoon, she waltzed over with a thick folder of HOA violations for the entire neighborhood, storm clouds forming in her eyes. "Fear not, I've reworked the bylaws. It's time to tighten the noose," she declared with a smirk that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My heart pounded in response, as did Sam's cautious intake of breath. I could sense chaos brewing on the horizon, Somewhere amidst gnome-flavored laughter and retiree boisterousness lurked the shadows of HOA tyranny. "What's in the folder, Linda?" I asked, though I really didn't want to know. The result was a cascade of anticipated compliance that nearly sent my sneakers flying in panic. Holding her folder high, like a flag of doom, she detailed various offenses. Unapproved lawn decor, yes, including my flamboyant gnome display, improper foliage height, and get this, my driveway had severe irregularities due to the rises and falls of everyday paving. It was a certified crisis cascading downwards. My colorful display had become the benchmark of supremacy, and as per HOA tradition, they would honor the most minuscule infractions with unwarranted discipline. The crowd gasped dramatically. It was like the climax of a bad thriller movie, where the villain reveals their master plan. I barely contained my giggles as I scanned my neighbors' expressions. Linda was about to send us all scrambling back to the days of decorum. But, oh, sweet karma, were we in ever so deep now? Yet, as she prattled on about consequences, a mischievous glint sparked in my eyes. I knew just what to do with her plans. "Linda, you may try to intimidate us with this folder of doom," I declared. "But how about an HOA talent show? Let's showcase our best talents. Decor artistry, questionable home cooking, and most importantly, ridiculous gnome impressions." The room erupted into laughter, and before Linda could take a breath, Sam grabbed the opportunity to brand the event with a resounding cheer. "Let's show Linda that creativity has no violations," he proclaimed, prompting cheers that rang through the neighborhood like a newly found war chant. This raucous proposal sent Linda reeling back momentarily, her carefully orchestrated authority buffeted by waves of outrageous enthusiasm drowned her formal warning. It felt just so right. And so, the first annual Welcome to Spiketown Talent Show and Gnome Olympics was born. As Linda reluctantly signed off on the community event, her eyebrows danced upward in disbelief as we erupted into the very chaos she had worked so hard to regulate. My neighbors sprang into action, crafting hysterical performances and extremes of neighborly spirit that blended glee and absurdity like the most melodious of orchestrations. Gnome-themed dance troupes took form, and I crafted perfectly ludicrous gnome napping skits unrivaled in their sheer zaniness. Ones that included high-fiving Linda's ever-skeptical dog. And oh, how the laughter ignited a rekindling of friendships and camaraderie like never before. Linda, against her will, found herself getting swept up in the spiraling wave of gnome-fueled excitement, clutching a spatula and joining in, showcasing her odd talent of creating instant gnome pops. The day of the talent show arrived, cloaked in bright spring sunlight and boasting a level of traffic makers detailed in the hustle-bustle of our little bubble. With most of the HOA bylaws scheduled for a temporary reprieve, Linda stood at the head of the gnome-adorned stage, caught between newfound enthusiasm and compact irritation. "Here in our neighborhood, not only do we maintain a lawn, but we also know how to laugh," she exclaimed, her dulcet tones bringing the audience to their feet in adoration. It was both terrifying and euphoric. The lines between HOA rigidity and camaraderie drew in a delightful haze of absurdity. Perhaps every rule could bend under the proper sunlight? In that very moment, I realized how much potential existed beyond protocols, and how, perhaps, together as a community, we could turn even compliance into something categorically fun. As the crowd cheered and laughter echoed through the air, I couldn't help but revel in the moment. Who knew a little sprinkling of absurdity could transform HOA rules into a stage for creativity and cooperation? What would happen next, in our anarchic corner of the suburban cosmos? The day after our wildly successful talent show, a peculiar scent wafted through the neighborhood. A mix of burnt hot dogs and what I could only describe as gnome essence permeated the air. Sam and I strolled down the street, congratulating our neighbors for their outrageous performances, and accepting high fives like celebrities recently freed from their contracts. The gnome-themed enthusiasm was infectious, fostering camaraderie that was as palpable as the excitement over Mrs. Catton's unintentional talking gnome, complete with a poetic ode dedicated to lawn care. As we reached my driveway, however, it wasn't just the lingering aroma that caught my attention. No, it was the unmistakable glittering of something sharp and malicious. Now, I'd call myself a somewhat organized person, but I could guarantee that I hadn't put any spikes out for personal flair. With my heart rate soaring and the previous day's joviality fading, I realized those glittering metal savages were the same array of friendly spikes that had claimed my tire during my last sweetheart rendezvous with my own driveway. A wave of rage surged within me, and I could almost hear Linda's smug glee echoing in my mind like a malicious soundbite. It was almost poetic justice equals. Our bashful HOA president had initially introduced those snares with finesse. Irony dripped from the moment as I unsheathed my phone to document this latest affront with the seriousness it deserved, a potential trap that could rival anything out of a poorly scripted horror flick. Well, who knew? Linda's artistic flair had a flair for aggression too, I quipped, chuckling dryly before feverishly snapping photos. This was going to need police involvement as surely as it needed, a poetic response worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy turned sitcom. Buffered by indignation, I called the authorities, but not without feeling a swell of pride that I was about to bring down the faux pas of Spikegate. The officer who arrived was a jovial guy named Carl, who, twice in our conversation, chuckled at my "I thought community was about conservation, not mutilation" quip. As we surveyed the scene, I felt like a crusader about to gather their troops for one last valiant charge, this time armed with posts and puns. As we spoke, Sam joined, leaning in as if he were the co-scripter of an unfolding drama. Ah, yes. This looks like a classic case of HOA vengeance, he proclaimed dramatically. But Carl, wise to the neighborhood's treacherous undercurrents, merely nodded. After the police left with the assurance that they'd be keeping an eye out for more art installations from Linda, I felt that strange mix of fury and vindication bubbling within me. The HOA had thrown the gauntlet, and I was ready to retaliate. Ideas swirled like autumn leaves caught in a gust, and the first critical piece of retribution fell into place: a gnome-themed vigilante group. Our devoted crew, armed with garden tools, strategically positioned garden gnomes, and whimsical signs throughout the neighborhood, proclaiming essential truths about community and lawn care. Our motto, "No spikes in sight," for fables written right. With social media fueled by fervor, we spread the word of our cause far and wide. Little did Linda know, the madness we birthed was about to reveal her true colors. We orchestrated midweek gatherings in my living room, where the laughter of planning mixed into heady cocktail parties of chaos. Sam's artistic eye transformed gnome statues into metaphors of rebellion. We crafted poorly spelled protest signs to embellish our newly minted gnome army. They were fresh, funny, and dressed in wild costumes. By the end of it all, we birthed an absurd, yet beautiful art installation at the edge of our driveways. Gnomes in tutus, capes made from colorful grocery bags, and lawn ornaments painfully sincere in their commitment to neighborhood justice. The day we unveiled our masterpiece, neighbors lined up beside us like we were renewing our covenant with gnome kind. Even Linda had shown up, sporting a furrowed brow and a reluctant smirk, her disdain dimmed by curiosity. Of course, Linda couldn't remain a passive spectator forever. Word spread, and soon her observable irritation morphed into something decidedly more dramatic. "We need to have an emergency HOA meeting," she announced one afternoon during her routine rounds in true Karen fashion. "Enough with the nonsense. What we need here is decorum and discipline." The audible gasp from my neighbors felt more like a united front than anything, while skeptical side eyes conveyed messages that were quite distinct. "Linda, the spiking gag is getting too sharp for the likes of us." Sam and I exchanged glances, silently attributing her escalating chaos to the overwhelming fear of a growing community united against her. But who would rise above the fray, us or our fierce HOA overlord? As that impending showdown loomed closer, anticipation crackled in the air like the fizz in a soda can, as all our chaotic efforts were poised to either deflate or get beautifully shaken. It was a standoff no one could have dreamed up, creativity facing off against bureaucratic oppression, our joyous signs glimmering defiantly against the imposing backdrop of Linda's closed folder of bylaws. Little did she know, we had become a troop of gnomes tied together by a silly cause, and as the weeks unfolded ahead, we were dreadfully determined to showcase that community spirit should never, ever meet the harsh edge of a spike. As I stood on the precipice of this confrontation, I thought, would we emerge victorious or simply be resigned to perilous HOA purgatory once more? As the day of the emergency HOA meeting crept closer, an electric buzz of anticipation crackled through the neighborhood. The Gnome Brigade had transformed my usually unremarkable cul-de-sac into something resembling an avant-garde art exhibit, gone delightfully awry. From my vantage point, I could see Sam meticulously fussing over a gnome in a makeshift Abraham Lincoln costume, a dazzling top hat made from an old soda can perched precariously on its head. "Nothing says, 'We stand for freedom,' like a little historical flair," he quipped, smirking as I squinted at the eyeliner mustache he'd attempted to draw. I laughed, imagining the spectacle we were about to unleash on the unsuspecting Linda, who must have felt like a general preparing to fend off an unruly gaggle of neighborhood misfits. However, in the back of my mind, I could hear the ominous bells of Linda's impending counterattack, each toll a reminder that she wouldn't throw in the towel so easily. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over our driveway, thoughts of her meticulously crafted bylaws and her unyielding authority danced mockingly in my head. I could already envision her storming into the meeting, armed with a PowerPoint presentation full of angry graphs, illustrating how lawn gnomes were a threat to property values and community decency. Little did she know, we had turned her modus operandi into our own beacon of hilarity. I had taken my role as an impromptu gnome maestro to heart, vowing not only to uphold my freedom, but to ensure that the absurdity of her actions would rebound on her tenfold. When the night of the meeting fell upon us, I could hardly contain my excitement, part nerves, part glee, as neighbors began to show up wearing the most outlandish gnome-themed attire one could possibly imagine. Seated together in my living room, we transformed what's usually the backdrop of Netflix binges into a vibrant tapestry of mischief. Sam energetically waved a banner that read, "Gnomes Unite, no spikes, just smiles," and I lovingly contributed a gnome-adorned dip platter that defied all culinary logic. If it can't be fun for the gnome cause, I contended, spooning what I dubbed gnome cheese spread from the bowl, then what even are we doing? As laughter erupted, I felt the weight of the neighborhood's camaraderie solidify, a collective buoyancy that seemed to have taken shape around us, buoyed by our love of rebellion and, of course, our shared disdain for Linda's rigid grasp on authority. As we strolled en masse toward the HOA meeting, it hit me that we were not just facing a grumpy HOA president, but a figurehead of nagging entitlement with an absurdly inflated sense of control over our lives. The community center was a grand old building, its walls decorated as if it had forgotten what fun looked like. We could hear Linda's sharp voice piercing through the interior like a needle through silk as she detailed all the grievous offenses committed by the beloved gnome installation. I could almost picture her at the front, arms crossed, wearing her best, business blouse, tapping her stilettos like an angry metronome of administrative authority. Was she going to go ahead and call us disruptive elements next? Who could blame a gnome or two for fighting back against adversity? Before the meeting commenced, I exchanged glances with Sam, our eyes gleaming with mischief and delight. Silence filled the room as we took our seats, a motley group of gnome lovers poised to shake the very foundations of HOA tyranny, at least for one night. The meeting started predictably with Linda at her pulpit, her meticulously crafted presentation evidently rehearsed for prime villainous effect. She highlighted discrepancies, laid down alleged rules violated by our cheerful assembly of gnomes, and attempted to paint herself as the hero fighting to restore order and dignity. However, our gnome brigade wasn't about to let her rhetoric slide. It was time to unleash the power of absurdity. Finally, when I was granted the floor, my heart did a little pirouette of excitement. As you can see, our gnome brigade not only champions vibrant creativity, I began, holding up a glittery gnome dressed as a rock star. But we promote community engagement. Ladies and gentlemen, who can resist arguing with a gnome that practically begs for conversation? Laughter rippled through the audience as I passed the gnome around, earning affectionate smiles from my neighbors, who were clearly ready to chant our motto with all the fervor of spirited activists. Linda's expression was a supreme blend of confusion and disgust, as if she simply couldn't comprehend how garden gnomes could trample her grand ideals. As I delivered my improvised speech, full of puns and gnome humor, I could see Linda's twitching brow furrow a little deeper, her frustration palpable as the ridiculousness of the situation transformed into something undeniably more powerful: unity. By the end of the meeting, we had swayed opinions and inspired laughter where there was once tension. Linda, red-faced and cornered like a lion, threatened by a gaggle of festive gnomes, finally blurted out, "This is absolute nonsense. You're trivializing important community standards." It was a statement that only added fuel to the fire as the tension boiled over into an uproar of laughter that she could not silence. In that moment, I realized gnome justice was no longer a far-fetched fairy tale. It was a hilarious reality that seemed destined to change the course of our neighborhood forever. Would this mark the end of HOA drama or merely the beginning of a new chapter in our gnome-fueled saga? The chaos that ensued in that community hall was nothing short of spectacular. Linda, cornered and visibly trembling at the realization that her grip on the neighborhood's strings had been hilariously cut, took a step back as my gnome brigade sprang into action. Armed with an array of inflatable daisies and foam gnome hats, my neighbors began to chant our new motto, "No spikes, just smiles." It was a rallying cry that seemed to bounce off the walls like a party balloon gone rogue. I plastered a grin on my face, momentarily basking in the glory of the spontaneous rebellion that had pushed Linda to the brink. She flailed her hands in protest, but nothing she did could drown out the spirited enthusiasm of a dozen neighbors ready to revolt and a few dozen gnomes cheering from the sidelines. Or at least, I imagined they were cheering, but Linda wasn't going down without a fight. She huffed loudly, attempting to regain some semblance of control over the situation that had spiraled into sheer absurdity. "Are you all really going to stand here and ridicule the hard work of your HOA?" she exclaimed, waving her arms emphatically as though she could physically pull back the laughter. "This is about neighborhood integrity and the sanctity of our property values." My heart raced, not from rallying cries and goofy headgear, but from the delicious anticipation of watching her facade crumble. After all, it's hard to maintain a sense of authority when you're met with a rainbow of inflatable gnomes and neighbors dressed as mythical garden creatures. The irony of witnessing Linda's administrative power being dismantled by gnomes wasn't lost on me. The unexpected eruption of applause truly threw Linda for a loop. Neighbors exchanged amused glances, the weight of their usual compliance replaced by a lightness of spirit that lifted the gloom clinging to the hall. I could see the moment the resistance took root in Linda's mind, and her carefully rehearsed spiel began to fall apart. Each time she tried to brandish another statistic or deluge us with HOA jargon, our responses were peppered with gnome puns. "Linda, you should lighten up. I promise. No one's going to mistake our gnomes for tax evaders," shouted Sam, sporting a bobbing gnome hat that oddly balanced on his head. This only fueled our laughter, and Linda's dwindling authority as her meticulously crafted rationale crumbled into more bits than my last DIY attempt at pottery. The sheer absurdity of it all was uncontainable. With the tide clearly turning, I decided to capitalize on the momentum. If we're to uphold community standards, how about we consider embracing whimsy and creativity? I proposed, waving a gnome decked out in a tutu, hoping to gain an even wider grin from the audience. After all, our gnome friends aren't just lawn ornaments. They represent individuality, joy, and the right to be a little weird, without the fear of being un-OA'd. Laughter erupted like a fireworks display gone invigoratingly wild. Linda, meanwhile, seemed to transform with each spark of joy around her, diminishing into a shadow of the iron-fisted ruler she had sought to be. It was as if the power of happiness, ridiculous and refreshing, had been the secret weapon all along. The meeting reached a crucial breaking point when Linda resorted to raising her voice, fully aware she was outmatched, yet wearing the indignity like her best blouse, the one she had saved for important battles. "You all don't understand. The integrity of our neighborhood is at stake," she shouted, sweat speed dripping down her temples. My gnome brigade erupted into fits of mirth at the irony of her situation. With the gnome community thriving and neighborly spirits high, we were practically bubbling over with camaraderie, united by the absurdity of limbs adorned with eclair-shaped hats and stockpiling gnome cookies. Yes, those lovely pumpkin spice delights invented for the occasion. It was hard not to share a conspiratorial smile with Sam, who had whipped out his phone to snap a picture of Linda's fiery distress, forever cementing her face of outrage into this grand tapestry of comedic history. Finally, I felt compelled to take the plunge and declare that we had officially eclipsed the original purpose of the begrudging HOA meeting. "Let's think beyond spikes. Our spirited marching gnome army deserves a place in our hearts," I said boldly. "Why should we assume that our quaint lawn decorations are a threat? Can't they simply be a delightful reflection of who we are as a neighborhood, fun-loving souls ready to live a little?" The room erupted in applause once more, a cacophony of amused claps and gleeful laughter that rang through the hall, drowning out Linda's desperate attempts to regain control. In that moment, she resembled an overcooked crab, clawing futilely at the insurmountable tide of joy that had overtaken what she thought was her fortress of order. And then it happened. Linda, with the last vestiges of her dignity hanging by a thread, threw her arms up in exasperation. "Fine, carry on with your gnomish antics," she huffed, storming out like a lone cloud that had suddenly lost its storm. "But don't expect me to support any more of your silly escapades," the audience gasped, a tense moment of silence hanging in the air before the room erupted into genuine cheers. We had won. We had pushed back against HOA tyranny with the most powerful weapon imaginable: sheer delight. Cheers erupted, and Sam hoisted me up in the air, gnome in one hand and a half-eaten gnome cookie in the other, as the gnomes seemed to wink at us, proud soldiers, in a whimsical battle for the soul of our cul-de-sac. But even as we celebrated, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. What other bizarre and rebellious escapades could we concoct? If Linda's spikes had catalyzed our gnome army, what else might we uncover beneath the surface of HOA rules turned ridiculous? The joy was contagious, but one question lingered. In our quest for freedom, exactly how far were we willing to go? As we basked in our hard-won victory, I took a moment to steady my thoughts amidst the joyous chaos of gnome hats and celebratory cookies. Sam, ever the intuitive friend, noticed my sudden pensive demeanor and ambled over, still wearing that goofy grin that made him look endearingly ridiculous. "What's cooking in that fiery mind of yours, Jamie? Besides gnome pastries, that is," he teased, gesturing grandly to the array of snacks that adorned the makeshift celebration table. The sheer absurdity of gnomes donning festive hats and our collective mirth had been deliciously intoxicating, yet I couldn't help but feel that the HOA war was merely shifting gears. Linda may have been ousted for now, but I had a creeping suspicion that she wouldn't go down like a gentle breeze. Her storms, once ignited, were known for lingering long after the clouds had cleared. Sam and I sauntered toward the leftover snacks, expertly dodging inflatable daisies that had accidentally become projectiles during our appreciative pandemonium. "You really think this gnome army is going to keep Linda at bay?" he asked curiously, plucking a gnome cookie adorned with bright icing. I shrugged, nonchalantly, even as the fluttering sense of triumph twisted in my gut like a mischievous imp. "Maybe for a bit," I admitted, "but I think we should keep our eyes peeled. I mean, she's not the type to roll over and play nice, is she?" The tension returned briefly as Sam nodded in solemn agreement. For in the world we inhabited, Linda's firm belief that HOA rules were sacrosanct was about as bendable as concrete. The thought of her plotting gave me pause. Our tiny victory had uncovered an annoying truth. This was perhaps just the beginning of our escapade against the iron-fisted HOA president. Back at home, I endeavored to unwind amidst my garden of gnomes. The sight of those whimsical creatures, their smiles like cheeky companions, gave me a spark of inspiration. Perhaps it was time to expand our gnome army. I flopped down with my drink in hand, soaking in the sunny ambiance of my yard, while brainstorming ways to further undermine Linda's despotic rule. My mind was racing, ideas spilling out like confetti, and soon I was jotting down everything from Gnome the Builder, DIY workshops, to whimsical community garden contests, meant to promote joy rather than rigidity. We could all use a little more fun, I thought aloud, rallying my inner gnome enthusiast. Sam had yet again opened a door to a creative shift, and I felt a stirring adventure beckoning from the horizon. Even the gnome cookies began to feel like mere appetizers to a much larger feast of rebellion. But the days that followed were peppered with a delicious mix of anticipation and mischief. Soon the neighborhood buzzed with gossip, stories of Linda's extravagant meltdown at the meeting morphing into folklore. Did you hear how the inflatable daisies danced in celebration? Or how the neighbors claimed to have sighted Linda in a fury, clutching gnome cookie crumbs as she plotted her next counteroffensive? It was pure entertainment, and I couldn't help but bask in the glory that had enveloped our community. Liberation was contagious, and rather than clamoring for compliance, my neighbors leaned toward liberation tactics. My cards were in play, and I was ready to raise the stakes. One peaceful cul-de-sac afternoon, I gathered the gnome devotees for our first official gnome rally. The idea was simple yet powerful. Each neighbor was encouraged to bring their quirkiest lawn decoration to showcase individuality, defiance, and of course, very little concern for HOA regulations. I imagined a parade of bizarre decorations, lawn flamingos mingling with hula hoop flamingos, as gnomes and wonky yard art flocked together, forming a jubilant spectacle in bold defiance of Linda's aesthetic stranglehold. Sam, taking on the role of our artistic director, whipped up flyers thick with puns that advertised the upcoming event. Dare to be gnome, no rules, just fun. The excitement was palpable, a new revolution taking shape under the warm sun, and I couldn't wait to see Linda's face as she tried to quell this feverish gnome revolution. As fate would have it, the day of our gnome rally arrived with all the pomp and flair that could be mustered. Gnome hats and cheery decorations adorned our lawns, transforming our neighborhood into a kaleidoscope of joyful expressions, where individuality thrived. With each neighbor showcasing their enchanting eccentricities, it was as if creativity had been released from its constraints, dancing in the streets, twirling hand in paw with the potted plants that proudly exhibited electric hues. I caught sight of Linda from a distance. Her tightly pursed lips and furrowed brow screamed discontent as she approached the jubilant scene, a storm cloud ready to rain. However, this was a spectacle she had never been equipped to handle. A cacophony of laughter erupted as Linda neared, and her self-righteous speech, intended to soil our fun, stumbled upon the sheer vivacity that glowed fiercely. "You will regret this," she shouted futilely, the sheer absurdity of her statement overpowering her own sense of authority. Her shoulders drooped under the ridiculousness of it all. A neighbor chimed in, "Linda, we're merely expressing ourselves." What's wrong with a little oompah of creativity? An uproar of agreement resonated through the crowd, and Sam elbowed me with a wink. "Looks like you forgot to include the gnome-free zone on that flyer." A ripple of laughter enveloped us as Linda's face deepened into shades of disbelief, reflecting the irony of her grievances and her inability to reconciliate their absurdity. This time, as she stormed off with her dreams of HOA dominance shattered into countless sparkly shards, it was evident she had lost far more than her grip on the neighborhood. She was now the punchline of her own joke. It was the gnome army's moment of triumph, a collective act of expression and rebellion, signaling the age of entitlement, transforming from grim drudgery into a celebration of laughter and whimsy. So here we stood, united once more, forging ahead in our quirky little paradise, a place where humor ruled supreme over fear. There would always be new challenges to face, but every spike Linda attempted to lay down had only succeeded in raising awareness of just how ridiculous it was to fear the joyful absurdity of individuality. This newfound spirit of resilience and unity was ultimately more powerful than any HOA sanctions. As we reveled in our victory just one more time, I relished the thought of sharing our stories and encouraged others to share theirs. Because what's a neighborhood without a few unforgettable tales of rebellion against preposterous entitlement?